This week on the show, we have FreeBSD internship learnings, also cover exciting developments coming to FreeBSD sooner or later, running FreeNAS on DigitalOcean, a little how-to there, network manager control for OpenBSD, OpenZFS User Conference videos are available, and batch editing files with Ed in this week's episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 247, Interning for FreeBSD, recorded on the 23rd of May, 2018. Hello, I'm your host, Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Glad to have you with us this week. We have exciting headlines that read what I learned during my FreeBSD internship. So that sounds interesting, so I might as well put up my FreeBSD hat. Yes. But Alan is reading that story.
Apparently. Okay. Yep. So this is a guest blog post on the FreeBSD Foundation's blog, where Benedikt is the vice president, not reading the story.
Well, I should take all the credit.
Over the summer, the FreeBSD Foundation had an intern from the University of Waterloo working on FreeBSD. And this is the story of how their summer went. So they say, "Hi, my name is Mitchell Horn. I'm a computer science engineering student at the University of Waterloo and currently in my third years of studies, and was fortunate enough to be able to do the FreeBSD Foundation's co-op student for the January to April semester. During this time, I worked under Ed Mast in the FreeBSD Foundation's small Kitchener office, along with another co-op student named Arshan Kanafar. My term has now come to an end, and so I'd like to share a little bit about my experience as a newcomer to FreeBSD and to open source development." So he begins a bit with the background and a small admission of guilt. I'm saying they've been an open source user for a large part of their life. They say, "When I was a teenager, I started playing around with Linux, which opened my eyes to the wider world of free software. Other than some small contributions to GNOME, my experience has been mostly as an end user. However, the value of these projects and the open source philosophy was not lost on me, and most of what motivated my interest in this position. Before beginning the term, I had no personal experience with any of the BSDs, although I knew of their existence and was extremely excited to receive the position. I knew it would be a great opportunity for growth, but I also must confess that my naivete about FreeBSD caused me to make the silent assumption that it would be a form of compromise, a stepping stone that would eventually allow me to work on open source projects that are somehow greater or more legitimate than FreeBSD. After 4 months spent immersed in the project, I have learned how it operates, witnessed its community, and learned about its history. I am happy to admit that I was completely mistaken, saying it now seems obvious, but FreeBSD is a project that has its own distinct uses, goals, and identity. For many, there may exist no greater opportunity than to work on FreeBSD full-time, and with that, I know how I would have a hard time coming up with a project that was more legitimate." So they're going to go on to talk a little bit about what they liked about the term. It says, "In all cases, the work I submitted this term was reviewed by no less than 2 people before being committed. The feedback and criticism I received was always both constructive and to the point, and it commented on everything from high-level ideas and design to small style issues. I appreciate having these thorough reviews in place since I believe it ultimately encourages people to accept only their best work. It is indicative of the high quality that already exists within every aspect of the project, and this commitment to quality is something that should continue to be honed or honored as a core value of the project. As I've discovered in some of my previous work terms, it is all too easy to cut corners in the name of a deadline or changing priorities, but the fact that FreeBSD doesn't need to make these types of compromises is a testament to the power of free software." They say, "It's a small thing, but the quality and completeness of the FreeBSD documentation was hugely helpful throughout my term. Everything you might need to know about utilities, library functions, the kernel, and more can be found in the manual pages. And the handbook is a great resource for both an introduction to the operating system and as a reference. I only wish I had taken some time earlier in the term to explore the different documents more thoroughly, as they cover a wide range of interesting and useful topics. The efforts people put into writing and maintaining FreeBSD's documentation is easy to overlook, but the value cannot be overstated. So then they go on to what they learned from their experience and say, although there was a lot I enjoyed, there were certainly many struggles I faced throughout the term and lessons to be learned from them. I expected that some of the issues I faced may be specific to FreeBSD, while others may be common to open source projects in general. I don't have enough experience to speculate on which is which, so I'll leave that up to the reader. So this is an especially big one. I think it applies to all of open source, but especially FreeBSD. The first lesson can be summarized or summed up pretty simply. You have to advocate for your own work. The FreeBSD is made up of a large part by volunteer effort, and in many cases, there is more work to go around than people available to do it. A consequence of this is that there will not be anybody there checking up on you. Even in my position where I actually had a direct supervisor, Ed often had his own plate full, and with many other things that the responsibilities to find someone to look at my work fell on me alone. Admittedly, a couple of smaller changes I worked on got left behind or stuck in review simply because there wasn't a clear person or place to reach out to get the review to push it forward. He says, I think this is both a barrier to entry to FreeBSD and a mental hurdle that I needed to get over. If there's a change you want to see included or reviewed, then you may have to be the one that pushes for it, and there's nothing wrong with that. Perhaps this process should be easier for newcomers and infrequent contributors, commenting on the disconnect between Bugzilla and Fabricator, and so on. But we also have to be aware that simply isn't reality right now. Getting your work looked at may require a little bit more self-motivation and noise making, but I'd argue that there are much worse problems a project like FreeBSD could have rather than this. I understand this is a lot better now, but it's still something I struggle with. I'm not naturally the type of person who easily connects with other people or asks for help. So I see this as an area of future growth rather than simply a struggle I encountered and overcame over the course of the work term. Certainly, it is an important skill to understand the value of your own work, and equally important in the ability to communicate that value to others.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Some of these observations are quite accurate.
It kind of goes to, we talk about open source and scratching your own itch. Those are the type of projects where you have more motivation to make it happen. So you spend more time on it, and you spend more time getting people to look at it and nagging people and hunting them down.
Really grinding your teeth in it. Yeah.
Whereas when it's just something you're doing and you don't care that strongly about it, maybe you're not going to quite lean in on it so much.
Yeah, that's some of the passion that I see in many of the newcomers, and that drives ultimately their efforts towards their own commit bits or whatever.
Yeah, it's, lots of people want to commit to FreeBSD, and we'd love to have them, but when you ask them what they want to work on, they don't know. And it's like, well, I can just pick an area and assign it to you, but you're just going to get frustrated and want to give up. You have to pick something that you have enough desire to get done, so that you'll be able to push through the I just don't want to work on this anymore kind of thing. So going on, Mitchell says, I also learned the importance of starting small. My first week or two on the job mainly involved getting set up and comfortable with the workflow. After my initial stage, I began exploring the project and found myself overwhelmed by its scale. With so many possible areas to investigate and so much work happening at once, I felt quite lost as to where to begin. Many of the potential projects I found were too far beyond my experience level, and most small bugs were picked up and fixed so quickly by more experienced contributors that I never got a chance to work on them. It's easy to make the mistake that FreeBSD is made up solely of a few rockstar committers that do everything. This is how it appears on the face sometimes, as reading through the commit logs, the bug reports, or the mailing list yields a few of the same names over and over. The reality is that just as important are the hundreds of users and infrequent contributors who take the time to submit bug reports, patches, and feedback. Even though there are some people who would fall under the umbrella of a rockstar committer, they don't get there overnight. Rather, they built up their skill and knowledge through many years of involvement in FreeBSD and similar projects.
Oh yeah, that's certainly true.
Yeah. As a student coming into this project and having high expectations for myself, it was easy to set a bar too high by comparing myself against some of those big committers. And I feel that my work was insignificant, inadequate, or simply too infrequent. In reality, there is no reason I should have felt this way. In a way, this comparison is disrespectful to those who have reached this level, as it took them a long time to get there. And there's a humbling reminder that any skill worth learning requires time, patience, and dedication. It's easy to focus on the end product and simply wish it to be there. But in order to be truly successful, you must start small, find satisfaction in the struggle of learning something new. And he says, I take pride in the many small successes I've had throughout the term here and appreciate the fact that my journey into FreeBSD and open source is just at its beginning.
Yeah.
So then they have some closing thoughts. So they say, I would like to close with a brief thank you. First to everyone at the Foundation for being so helpful and allowing the position to exist in the first place. I'm extremely grateful to have been given this opportunity to learn about and give back to the open source world. I'd like to especially thank office mates Ed for being an excellent mentor who offered an endless wealth of knowledge and willingness to share it. And my classmate and fellow intern Arshan for giving me a sense of camaraderie and comfort, reminding that in many moments they were just as lost as I was. Finally, a quick thanks to everyone else I crossed paths with who offered review and advice on the work. I appreciate your help and look forward to working with you further. It says, I'm walking away from this co-op with a much greater appreciation of this project and have made it a goal to remain involved in some capacity. I feel that I've gained a little bit of a wider perspective on my place in the software world, something I never really got from any of the previous work terms. Whether it ends up being just a stepping stone or the beginning of much larger involvement, I thoroughly enjoyed my time here.
Well, yeah, that's certainly a good wrap-up of the whole time. And thank you, Mitchell, and especially Ed and the other co-working students who worked on these projects and, did all the mentoring and the organization behind the scenes for. And I think there's a lot of things, big and small, happened in those co-ops that, who knows, might become a part of the project in the future in some way or the other. Okay, so now I'm taking off this hat because this item is done. And the next one is recent developments in FreeBSD. So we titled it this way because we couldn't find a proper title for it because it's some of these things
it's
that
just
are
a
on the
bunch of
horizon.
random things that have happened in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, so things that we got excited about and wanted to mention on the show. So the first one is
The first
support
one
for
is the culmination of more than 10 years of work, I think.
Yeah, sure,
But
it has a history.
on AMD 64, ARM 64, i386, PowerPC 64, and SPARC 64 for FreeBSD, the kernels are now compiled by default with the kernel crash dump support, encrypted crash dump support, compressed crash dump support, and network dump support.
Yeah, so we got a lot
now,
of
when your
ways,
kernel crashes, the crash dump can be compressed with gzip or Z standard, and giving you better compression. It supports encrypted crash dumps in case your machines are sensitive and you don't want what's in memory laying around after a crash, and network crash dumps. So if your machine doesn't have enough spare space to dump all of its RAM to disk, you can dump to the network. I know that's been an issue a couple of times. It's like, well, when you have hundreds of gigs of RAM, you really don't want to have like a whole SSD just to be able to crash to in case you ever need that. And so network dumps are very nice.
Mhm.
And but now that the network dump support is finished and the encrypted dump support is finished, it's now enabled by default.
Oh yeah, excellent. So we have a much better way of collecting these and figuring out what the underlying problems are.
Mm-hmm. And as Dexter says in the chat room, better late than never. The network dump code has its origins going back so old that it's old enough to vote now.
Okay. Yeah, sometimes some things take longer than expected, and yeah. But now that they're there, or at least in head, is that in head? Okay.
And then,
so
the next item is more work sponsored by the FreeBSD Foundation, and this is a tool to split the Intel microcode updates into separate files. So in the new format, Intel will give out microcode with individual files for a type of CPU instead of just one big file. And so the tools are switching to only accepting the one file, but all the existing microcode we have is in the one big file format. So this is a tool that will split these up and allow for our newer interface that'll support the newer types of microcode that Intel is working on releasing as they try to address more of these Spectre and Meltdown type vulnerabilities.
Yeah, this will keep us busy basically throughout the year as more things are being revealed about those. But the tool is an important piece of that to update the microcode on these chips.
Yep. Again, it's kind of the foundation in its role of the work that we all need, but none of us makes any money off of.
Yeah, it's this tool. It's important, but it's not the feature that you would use every day for the rest of your computing history life. But certainly it's needed.
So the next item is the Intel Speculative Store Bypass Disable control. Which just sounds like a bunch of random words stuck together. But SSB, or Speculative Store Bypass, is a speculative execution side channel vulnerability that was identified by Google's Project Zero and the Microsoft Security Response Center. And if you have the updated Intel microcode, it adds a new MSR that allows you to disable that feature to mitigate the vulnerability. So now there's a new sysctl hw.spec store bypass disable to provide a global control over the SSBD bit, akin to the existing IBRS feature. So if it's set to 0, then it's off. If it's set to 1, it's on. And if it's set to 2, it's auto. There's also future work coming, which will enable applications to control it on a per process basis, so that they can differ from, you can turn it on globally, but off for the one app that it breaks or something like that.
Okay, another important utility.
Well, it's not really a utility, it's kernel functionality, but yeah.
Yeah, that's switching back and forth or on and off. Next up in that list is Raspberry Pi 3 B+ Ethernet driver. So there has been an updated revision of the Raspberry Pi 3. And that one has apparently a microchip controller that needs to be supported on FreeBSD, of course. And apparently this is now working. And this is also part of the work that Arshan did as his co-op, as part of his co-op work. And the two Ethernet controllers that are there are now supported. There's one that's built-in USB hub, and the other one is basically USB 3.1, and there will also be documentation how to use these. And yeah, this is the Ethernet controller for the Raspberry Pi 3 B+.
Mm-hmm. Then I also picked out a couple of interesting things that are coming up. More on the Spectre mitigation stuff. There's IBRS support for i386, which actually, it seems, was committed last night after I wrote the show notes, but before we displayed them today.
Right on time. Okay.
This was committed this morning. So
fresh.
there is now IBRS support on i386 in FreeBSD head. So that doesn't even go under upcoming anymore.
It's already happened. Yeah, so we'll move things around
in the show notes. And then related to that Intel microcode update, there's also updates to the dev CPU data port to update the AMD microcode. So you can keep that up to date on your system as well. So that's coming soon. And we'll have support for the new firmware formats or microcode formats for both, and firmware data for both Intel and AMD CPUs.
Yep. And
then if you're into networking, there's a post that just came up from Randall Stewart at Netflix which is upstreaming their work on the rack TCP/IP networking stack from Netflix into the FreeBSD tree. So this is the I forget what the R stands for.
Yeah,
something like that.
Anyway,
it's a new high-performance network stack that's good. So if you do a lot of high packet rate stuff or anything like that, it's definitely worth checking this out and making sure that if there are any issues, they can be addressed before it gets committed instead of after.
Yep, earlier is better, and then the fixes won't even, or the bugs won't even be in the release. So people will only see working code or can use working code. Very nice. So yeah, we'll look forward to these things. And of course, there's always developments happening, and some of these take longer. Some of these are a little bit further away from realization, but they will happen eventually. And yeah, we'll keep you updated if there's more exciting news.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, there is some stuff going on. So I guess technically it was 48 minutes ago, voting in the FreeBSD core election started.
It's that time of the year again, yeah, or every 2 years
at least. Every 2 years, yeah.
So yeah, for the people who don't know about this, so FreeBSD's, let's say, governing structure is elected. So every 2 years we elect a number of people, 9 of them, as the core team. And this way, there's this consensus-based democracy versus, the benevolent dictatorship. So we chose the consensus one, and that's where people can, vote for certain candidates. Up to 9 votes, I think, is doable.
The core team is made up of 9 people. Everybody who's made a commit, or every committer to FreeBSD that's been active in the last year gets to vote, and you pick the 9 people off the list of this year's 16 people. And that's how, and then whichever of those people get the most,
the first 9
votes, that's the new core team.
Mm-hmm. And I think developers have, so this is only for FreeBSD developers, so outside people don't have a vote in this, and they have 4 weeks roughly to vote. So
yes,
considering holiday time and conferences,
voting
and
closes on June 20th at 1800 UTC.
Okay, and we'll make sure to let you know who has won, as well as whether Alan and I will be on the next core again, because we also ran.
Quick rundown of the candidates for this core election. Myself and Benedict are running again. We happen to be alphabetically first on the list. There's not conspiracy there, I swear. Then Ruslan Bukin from Cambridge, who's been doing a lot of work on RISC v5 and so on. Brooks Davis, Michael Dexter, Devin Teskey, Aiden Adler, Hiroki Sato, Warner Losh, Jeff Roberson, John Baldwin, Josh Petzel, Chris Moore, Martin Wilkie, Sean Chittenden, and Nicholas Seising.
Okay. Well, then let the voting begin.
9 of those people will make up the next core team.
Yep. So, and the current core team will be still in office until July 4th, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And then there's switch over.
The results of the election will be announced on Wednesday, June 27th. So we'll bring those to you live. We'll have live election coverage here on BSD Now. And that they'll take office the next Wednesday, which is July 4th.
Okay. Very nice.
Which will only be a holiday for the Americans, I think. Although, actually, when does that land on the calendar? Right, yes. It's the Monday that'll be a holiday in Canada.
Okay. This week's episode of BSD Now is sponsored by DigitalOcean. Head over to digitalocean.com, and don't forget, if you're a first-time registrant, get your promotion code that Alan has for you, because you get a lot.
If you go to the URL FreeBSD Now, it'll take you to a special secret page where if you sign up, they'll give you $100 credit in your account to play with for 60 days.
That's something for virtual machines in the cloud. And you can
but if you already have an account but haven't used a coupon code previously, use our regular old-fashioned coupon code FreeBSD Now, and you will get $10 added to your account.
That's already something to start with. And you can start with a small machine and scale it up the way you like it. Or you run it for like a month or so and try certain things and then stop it again or destroy it. And then you won't get billed for further cycles.
And actually, our next story also covers DigitalOcean, so stay tuned for that. But one of the other nice things about DigitalOcean is they also pay people to write tutorials.
Oh, yeah, in the community section.
They have 44 tutorials tagged as FreeBSD on their website, and you can covers all kinds of things from how to SSH securely using Kryptonite through using installing things and how to track network latency with FreeBSD, or how to configure encrypted ZFS pools on DigitalOcean block storage, or configuring NTPD or a DNS resolver or whatever you want. How to install Ruby on Rails using FreeBSD.
Yeah.
And if there's not a tutorial for what you want to do, figure it out and then click this Write a Tutorial button, and they'll pay you to write the tutorial.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be all on DigitalOcean. It can also be a tutorial how to set up, I don't know, Kubernetes, because it's the hot new thing. And they also have an announcement that Kubernetes is coming soon to DigitalOcean, so in September apparently, so stay tuned for that. And while you're waiting, you should explore the other things that DigitalOcean has to offer. And yeah, try it out for yourself. That's the best way to figuring out whether this is something that you can use in your business or even in your private life, little machine here and there.
Whether you want the smallest $5 droplet with a gig of RAM, or if you need something much bigger, they can do it all for you. And it's all billed hourly, and it's super easy. They have great control panel or an API if you want to do it programmatically. Great command line tools for using the API. Whatever you need to do, super easy. Great support and tutorials. And you get to choose from lots of locations, whether you want it in San Francisco, New York, Toronto, London, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, Bangalore, or Singapore.
Yeah, those are the ones. So one of those should be close to you, and that will give you the proper connectivity and closeness to your virtual machine, which are called droplets in DigitalOcean.
Mm-hmm.
All right, our next story is, as Alan mentioned, a connection to this little ad space here, running FreeNAS on a DigitalOcean droplet. So that sounds interesting, or at least as an interesting combination, because typically you would think you would get your FreeNAS box at home and don't necessarily run it in the cloud.
In this particular case, they have a FreeNAS at home and they want to back it up somewhere in the cloud. But they don't want to just give somebody else their files. They want to use FreeNAS.
Yeah, that's an interesting use case. So it starts with, need to back up your FreeNAS offsite? Run a lockdown instance in the cloud and replicate to it. The tutorial that we have here.
That's my summary of this thing.
Sure.
So yeah, the blog post says, I've needed an offsite FreeNAS setup to replicate things to run some things and do some other stuff. Basically, my own privately owned, tightly controlled NAS application in the cloud. One I controlled from top to bottom and with support for whatever crazy things I wanted to do. Since I'm using DigitalOcean as my main VPS provider, it seemed logical to run a FreeNAS there. However, you can't, right? FreeNAS isn't one of the options in the dropdown when you create a new droplet. However, using the same method we've talked about before for installing OpenBSD or NetBSD or Dragonfly on DigitalOcean, you can install FreeNAS.
Cool.
Do you want to walk through the steps I noted?
Yep, that's the FreeNAS part. This is actually nicely done, this how-to with screenshots and all, so you can follow along. And So yeah, as Alan said, we need to do this manually. There's no pre-built FreeNAS that you can just select, but the installation is pretty straightforward. You should be able to follow along with the screenshots. So basically, after you run through that, then it's back to, are we back to DigitalOcean then to do some things in their UI, or is it all now in the virtual machine?
Start at the top.
Okay, so here we go. So three things that you need to do before you begin. You need a droplet, of course, in DigitalOcean. So with our coupon code or on your own credit card, that's up to you. That we'll use to re-image the boot block device with the FreeNAS ISO, because it has to be installed somehow, so it has to have a FreeNAS ISO available to install. Then we'll install the FreeNAS on the second block device. Why? We'll explain later on. And once we're done with that, we're going to do the old switcheroo. We're going to re-image the original boot block device, and then we're using the now FreeNAS installed second block device. That's the trick to make it work.
Well, yeah, basically, you can't, the installer can't install over top of the installer. Right?
Yeah.
So you start up a FreeBSD instance in DigitalOcean and add a block device. Then on the block device, you download the FreeNAS installer, and then you take that FreeNAS installer and write it over the boot disk and reboot, and that'll boot the FreeNAS installer. Then you have the FreeNAS installer install to the block device. Then you reboot again, but you've had DigitalOcean re-image the boot disk with FreeBSD again. Although I imagine you could do it from the shell in the FreeNAS installer if they offered that as an option in there. Anyway, then you copy the FreeNAS install from the block device back to the boot device, and then you can throw the block device away and stop paying for it. And you only used it for an hour, so it costs you like half a cent. And now, when you reboot again, you have an installed FreeNAS running.
Yep. All of a sudden, a new installation pops up. And so that's what you start with. And so for the people who are not familiar too much with FreeNAS, it's all GUI-based or web GUI-based. So it's pretty easy to use.
It too, but
yeah, sure. But I guess for creating certain things, it's easier to just click and don't mess with config files. But that's up to you. So you need to point your browser to your DigitalOcean droplets IP that's been displayed, or that's basically been given to you once the droplet's been created. And so again, this is a demo only. There's no SSL setup, so it's not very secure. But you can do those additional steps on your own. This is just to get it up and running. So there are some other, so there's an initial wizard that will prompt you for certain things to prevent certain mistakes that are made often, or do certain things that shouldn't be done. So that will walk you through some of the items there. And yeah, then you should have a super awesome storage appliance in the cloud. What you can do then, because DigitalOcean also offers block storage, you can add those too, and then they will immediately show up in your FreeNAS. And there's an example screenshot here where there's a simple stripe from 2 such block devices are being made, and then you can share those on the internet using Samba. Well, don't share it on the internet.
Probably
for everyone.
In this case, it's a backup FreeNAS, so you turn most of all the services off and just have replication going from your NAS to this cloud NAS.
Yeah, only that. No one else should be able to access that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and then the screenshots are very nice and accurate, and see what it looks like, and
and then you can just use the FreeNAS replication wizard to set up sending snapshots from your home NAS to your cloud NAS. And also, as a note at the end, I say that you can consider creating a new block device to actually create your main pool. You know, if you make your FreeNAS with a small DigitalOcean droplet that's only got like 30 gigs of space, and you can do that and have the main pool, all your storage done on the DigitalOcean block device, which you can grow over time more easily. And then you'll have whatever size storage you need for your pool.
Sure. Yeah. So, and from there you can do a lot more stuff within FreeNAS. Again, this is in the evil internet, so be careful.
And
but it's available.
The other advantage to the separate block device is it makes it easier to move it to a fresh DigitalOcean droplet if you, say, want to install a newer version of FreeNAS or something.
Time for the news roundup this week. We have a story here about network manager control for OpenBSD, and this one has been updated, so it's even more interesting to read on the show. It's about the network manager for OpenBSD, and this begins with the generalities. I just remind the scope of this small tool. This allows you to predefine several cable or Wi-Fi connections. Lets NMCTL control automatically the first available one and allow you to easily switch from one network connection to another. So this is, if you have a lot of connections or a lot of networks available, this is kind of convenient, and also creates an open box dynamic menu. So that's a bit more into the GUI integration part. And the enhancements in that version are this is the second development version, so this is 0.2. There were performance changes, or no, not just performance, several changes in the code. There were code style cleanups to better match the Python recommendations and adopt a tool to allow to connect to an open Wi-Fi having blanks in the name. That's kind of important. You would think, blanks in the name, how hard could it be? But it needs to be supported. This happens in some of the hotels. I stayed at a hotel last week which had not so good Wi-Fi, so I had to tether the whole time with my phone, but that's not a story. The source code is still on the Git of sourceforge.net, sorry. The files are available in the typical Git style, and you can grab it from there if you're interested in this. So apparently there was a bit of feedback from a couple of months back, and the script is used on the OpenBSD laptop since about 5 months from the developer. In that particular case, it's mainly used in the open box menu and the restart option. So in case you're roaming around and moving to another network, then you use the restart option to regenerate that menu and see the currently available Wi-Fi hotspots or any other networks. The open box menus are working fine. As explained in the previous blog post, I just have to create 2 entries in the open box menu, XML file, and all the rest comes automatically from the NMCTL itself, thanks to the list and scan options. So that gives you a little bit more comfort in just, oh, look, there's a new network. Oh, look, there's a new SSID appearing. So apparently this is not changed in NMCTL parts since it works as expected, at least for the author. And the restart option, because I'm very lazy, that one goes, and because OpenBSD is very simple to use, I've added the command nmctl-restart in etc apm resume. Thanks to apmd, this script will be used each time I'm opening the lid of my laptop. This is nice, so you just open and have directly your connectivity to the Wi-Fi's around you. In other words, each time I'm opening my laptop, NMCTL will search the optimum network connection for me and connect to that. But I had several issues in this scenario. So most of the problems were linked to the ARP table issues. Indeed, in some circumstances, my proxy IP address was associated to the cable interface instead of the Wi-Fi interface, or vice versa. So as a consequence, I'm not able to connect to the proxy, thus not able to connect to the internet. So the ping to Google, which is the final test NMCTL performs, is failing. Knowing that, anyhow, I'm doing a full ARP cleanup. It's not clear to me from where this problem came from. To solve the situation, I've implemented a retry concept. In other words, before testing in another possible network connection, as listed in the nmctl config file, the script will try 3 times the current connection's parameters, and if that fails, then it will switch to the next one, I guess. And if you want to reduce or increase these figures, you can do that with the retry parameter. So if you want to retry 5 times, then you just supply that. And the results of my expertise with this small tool, wherever I'm located, my laptop is now connecting automatically to the Wi-Fi/cable connection previously identified for this location, which is nice if you're at the conference from last year and you just automatically reconnect if there weren't any changes. So it's nice to just continue where you left off. Currently, I have 3 places where I have Wi-Fi credentials and 2 offices where I just have to plug the network cable. Since the etc APM resume scripts are triggered when I open the lid of the laptop, I just have to make sure that I plug the RJ45 before opening the laptop. For the rest, I do not have to type any commands. OpenBSD does it all what I need. Cool. In hotels,
I think it'd be interesting to have something like this where it identified the network by like the MAC address of the router.
Oh yeah, directly, because that doesn't change normally.
Right. But yeah, it's interesting. Obviously that doesn't quite work on, for my laptop, if the Wi-Fi and the wired both use the same router, it still needs to be able to treat those 2 differently.
Yeah, and you would normally pick the faster one if that one is available. But yeah, it's a good start. And so in hotels or restaurant, I can just connect to the Open Wi-Fi thanks to the OpenBox menu, and that will do the nmctl-scan. Next steps are documentation. The tool is missing a lot of documentation. I appreciate OpenBSD for his great documentation, so I have to do the same. Well, that's a good attitude here. I plan to write a README and a man page at first instances, but since my laziness, I will do it as soon as I see some interest for this tool from other persons. Okay, you've been featured on BSD Now. I guess you will not have to wait long for people to try this out. Testing. I'm now have to travel and see how the script reacts under different situations. Yeah, expose it to different networks and then see how it works then. Interested persons are welcome to share with me the outcome of their tests. I'm curious how it works, and you can find on the webpage that we linked in the show notes the connection or the contact information. Well, that's nice. So little utilities to help you in your networking life. The next story is also about OpenBSD. This is OpenBSD 6.3 on the Edge Router Lite, a simple upgrade method. Yeah, simple upgrade methods always sound good because why make it complicated if you can just use it easily? The too long didn't read goes, OpenBSD 6.3 Octeon upgrade instructions may not factor that your ERL is running from the USB key they want wiped with the miniroot 63.filesystem image loaded on it. So you place the bsd.rd for OpenBSD 6.3 on the SD0i slice used by the U-boot for the kernel, and then edit the command prompt to run it. So the bigger story, or basically what this is going to, is that the OpenBSD documentation is comprehensive, but there might be rough corners around what are probably edge cases in the user base. People running the Edge Router Lite hardware, for example, who are looking to upgrade from 6.2 to 6.3. And so the documentation, which gave us everything we need last time for the initial bring up, I guess, left me with some questions about how to upgrade. In install.octeon, the upgrade section does mention the following parts that you can find on the website. Well, basically it says the best solution whenever possible is to back up your data and reinstall from scratch. Yeah, not so good if you have already a lot of stuff running on that and a lot of data, and well, yeah, it's kind of, it would be nice to have this in place. So it continues. I had to check if that directive existed in documentation for other architectures. I wonder if Octeon users were getting singled out. We were not. Just simplicity.
Not an OpenBSD. That's for everybody.
Yeah, just simplicity and pragmatism. So reading on, to upgrade OpenBSD 6.3 from a previous version, start with the general instructions in the section installing OpenBSD. But that section requires us to boot off of TFTFP, of course, or NFS, which I don't want to do right now, because also use a USB stick with the miniroot 63.filesystem installed on it. But as the ERL only has a single USB port, we would have to remove the USB stick with the current installer on it. Once we get to the install or upgrade prompt, there would be nothing to upgrade. So, well, I guess I could use a USB hub, but or else USB port is inside the case with all the screws in, and the tools are neatly put away, and I have to pull the USB hub from behind the workstation, and it's 2 a.m. and it's cleaned up the cabling in the lab this past weekend. Looks nice for once. So I don't want to futz around with all that. There must be an almost interchangeably easier way to do this than rather than setting up a TFTP server or NFS share in 5 minutes, right? So to do that, there's instructions laid out in the blog post, and it's quick, and it's not just setting up the whole server. It's much easier than setting up the whole TFTP server parts. And well, let's keep that as a surprise for people who are interested in that, and they can dig into it. We have all it in the show notes, and they will find that it's easy to do, and you can get your little box updated to OpenBSD 6.3.
Mm-hmm. This week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by IX Systems. Head over to ixsystems.com/BSD Now and get the ultimate guide to buying a new server for open source.
Yep. Check them out and ask them specifically, I want to build a server for that specific open source application or operating system even. And they will tell you, oh, we have those specific hardware parts that are supported by the operating system you want to run, or this application uses more memory, so you should put more memory into it, or this application needs more CPU power. Then they will build you a server exactly for that specific application that the server is intended for, and not just something off the shelf that every customer gets.
If you're going to put some SSDs in your file server for, say, a slog and an L2 ARC, you probably don't want the same kind of SSD for both of those. One, you want small and high endurance. The other, you want more capacity and the right thing. And also you have to consider the amount of L2 ARC versus the amount of RAM. If you have too much L2 ARC and not enough RAM, you're actually going to make your caching speeds worse than if you just didn't have the L2 ARC at all. And so getting your hardware from people that understand that and can validate the configuration you want to make sure you're not, making a mistake is very helpful.
Oh yeah, certainly. And they do a lot of
really any hardware vendor that knows more about ZFS.
Yes, and integration with the hardware is also the important part, because the best ZFS system doesn't work too well if the hard drives are too slow, or there's not a good, ZIL available, or something else. But IX Systems have built.
You also want the white glove treatment and the advanced replacement on the failed disks and so on. Right? Your disks are plotting against you. They're going to fail at the least convenient time possible. Having a hardware supplier that can ship the replacement hard drives directly to the data center and let you ship the failed ones back after instead of before means that you can get your pool back to an online state and out of degraded in a couple of days instead of weeks. And that makes your life a lot better because you're not spending a bunch of that time worrying if another drive fails, we lose everything.
Yes, and that makes you sleep better at night. And IX Systems is also going to a lot of conferences and events to not only showcase what they have to offer, but also they sponsor events. So, but also
just representing FreeBSD at a lot of these events.
Oh yes, yeah. So they have a lot of stuff from their conferences on their company blog, and the current one is Boise Technology Show 2018 recap.
Boise, so in Idaho. They say every year, Fisher Technologies, our Idaho channel partner, holds a one-day technology show. And this year, IX was excited to be a platinum sponsor and the exclusive storage exhibitor. So they were showing off all of their fancy storage products.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they have a lot to show.
Mm-hmm.
And if you happen to be at one of those conferences or trade shows, then say hi to the IX Systems folks and talk to them about the future servers you want to buy, or some of the backup solutions that you always wanted to do and didn't have time for. And they can probably tell you about their little FreeNAS Mini for the office, or they could also give you the big rack server. It's everything in between those two.
Yep. And circling back to the ZFS User Conference that was a couple of weeks ago, the good people over at Datto have updated the website, zfs.datto.com, with the videos and slides from all the presentations.
Yeah, excellent. I specifically look forward to the Z standard compression talk, but there's other good talks in there. I need to spend a couple of hours.
Slides to Microsoft Office.
Oh, and that didn't screw this up too much?
That's fine.
Okay. I put it on my to-watch list. And
but yes, the videos of all the different talks are there, so it's worth checking out.
Excellent. So to top it all off, we have a story about batch editing files with ED. Oh, wow.
Yes,
that's
so
certainly...
If you're not familiar with ED, it is the original editor for Unix. And you should check out Michael Lucas's book, EDY Mastery. But if you want to see some interesting things you can do with it, here's a great example over on Julia's blog. So she says, the other day at work, I needed to edit 200 files at once. I wanted to do something pretty basic. I had files that looked like this. So a header foo, and then I think it's YAML here, and it had bar, baz, and bananas. And I wanted to insert an extra line after any line that said baz that says elephant. So the list would now say bar, baz, elephant, bananas.
Okay, and this is in 200 files?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I had an extra weird requirement that with some of the lines would be indented with 2 spaces and some of them with 4 spaces. So the dash elephant line needed to have the same indentation as the previous line so that it would line up. I didn't feel like writing a program to do this. Perl would be perfect, but I don't really remember how to do Perl. So I wanted to use a command line tool. A VI or a Vim macro could do it, but how do you save a Vim macro to a file again? I forget. I couldn't think of how to do it with sed at the time, although in retrospect, I could have done something like this, where you can see they capture the white space before the word baz and then splat it down in the replace there. In a surprising turn of events, I ended up using the ED editor to do this, and it was really easy and simple to do. In this blog post, I'll make the case that if you have something you might normally accomplish with a Vim macro, you might conceivably want to do it with ED instead. In case you didn't know, the patch tool originally used ED for a lot of stuff, and some patch tools still do.
Yep. It shows flexibility of that tool, but yeah, it's not the tool you would go to as your first resource. But so it can do that.
ED is the sort of terrifying text editor. The typical interaction with ED for me in the past has gone something like starting ED, typing help, question mark, H, question mark, spamming the keyboard, nothing, then close the terminal. Basically, if you do something wrong, ED will just print out a single unhelpful question mark, being like, what do you want?
I don't know.
I basically dismissed ED as an old arcane Unix tool that had no practical use today. VI is a successor to ED, except for a visual interface instead of this question mark. But surprise, ED is actually sort of cool and fun. So if ED is a terrifying thing that only prints question marks at you, why am I writing a big blog post about it? Well, on April 1st of this year, Michael W. Lucas published a new book called EDY Mastery. I like his writing, and even though it was sort of an April Fool's joke, it is also a legitimate, actual, real book. And so I bought it and read it, and to see if his claims that Ed actually was interesting were true. And it was so cool, I found out how to get Ed to give me better error messages than just a question mark. And that the name for the grep tool originates from the Ed syntax, where G/ and then the regular expression you're searching for is /P. The basics of how to navigate a file using Ed, and so on. All of this was cool Unix history, but did not make me feel like I would use Ed in my real life. But the other neat thing about Ed is that the Ed session corresponds to a script that you can replay. So if I know Ed, I can use Ed basically as a way to simply apply a Vim macro-like program to some files. So in this case, search for Baz, copy and paste that line, and then replace Baz with elephant, and then save and quit. So we can translate into an Ed script of /Baz .t which will copy the line and paste it on the next line, then search and replace Baz with elephant, and then save and quit. Note, Ed doesn't actually have comments. Those comments are just for you to understand what these random letters mean. But then if you just cat that Ed script and pipe it into Ed, a file, it will run the script on the file. So it turns out Ed is at least a little bit useful. It was super surprising and delightful for me to find a practical use for Ed. To me, the most compelling thing about Ed is that I use simple Vim macros a lot, and it's a decently direct way to translate those Vim macros into a way to batch edit a bunch of files. I'm definitely not going to go telling everyone that they should be using Ed, and it's definitely not very user-friendly, but I think it's neat. And if you're interested, she highly recommends you buy EDY Mastery from Michael Lucas.
Yes, that's your source if you want to dig deeper into that editor and, learn more things like that. Time for the Beastie Bits this week. We have a nice segment into FreeBSD Mastery jails, since we just mentioned Michael W. Lucas. This is apparently happening in the future, at least it's on its writing schedule. Jails, help make it happen. So,
so Michael on his blog says, I've been scurrying to finish the book Git Sync Murder, the sequel to Git Commit Murder, so that it would be available for purchase at BSD Can. Sadly, this isn't going to happen. I are disappointed. If I've been writing anything else, it could have been done. But the numbers show that these cozy mysteries are not my natural form. Most of the time, I top out at about 500 words per hour, as opposed to the 1,000 words per hour I achieve writing my normal fiction involving flamethrowers and bare-knuckle amateur dentistry. For the record, I am fine with the speed. Quality beats speed any day. I'm therefore falling back on my usual writing schedule of 1.5 to 2 hours per day on fiction and the rest of the day on nonfiction. Per my 2018 schedule, it's time to start writing FreeBSD Mastery jails. I've been idly assembling the parts over the last couple of months. For you folks who've said you want to sponsor it, you have the choice of sponsoring the ebook or the print edition. Depending on how the book comes out, I might do a second jails book. Print sponsors on this book will have the option to sponsor the second book at a reduced rate. Those who sponsor both will receive a special jail-themed recognition. It'll be completely depending on how complex the book is. The goal is always the best book.
Yeah, I was just going for the, sponsored by within the book, no extra stuff. But yeah, if it helps make that happen, then and a jails book is definitely needed because you can do a lot of things in jails, which you probably don't know. And it's good that Michael is starting to write that. Next up is, more OpenZFS news. We have OpenZFS Basics presented by George Wilson and Matt Ahrens at Scale 16 back in March. So this is the recording of their presentation. And yeah, this gives you some OpenZFS basics. If you haven't heard about this file system by now, it's a good introduction. And Dragonfly,
it's also a good basis if you wanted to give a similar talk at another conference. Who better to crib a intro to ZFS from than like two of the people that have written the most code in ZFS?
Yeah, that's a good introduction. Yeah, watch that one and maybe learn something you didn't know before.
Yes, and then a Twitter conversation I had the other day has turned into some code in Dragonfly BSD. So Bill Yuan, who works on the IPFW 3, I think they call it, the IPFW version in Dragonfly BSD, has added his new high-speed lockless in-kernel NAT instead of using libalias to do the NAT translation. So he doesn't have benchmarks on how big of a difference it makes yet, and there isn't matching documentation just yet, but the new data structures are there, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I'm mostly interested in what it ends up looking like and how hard that might be to port to FreeBSD.
Yeah, for the code base has, I think, a bit diverged between the different BSDs.
But it's mostly, libalias hasn't really gotten a lot of love in FreeBSD land, and it'd be good to see if there's some way to make it better.
Mm-hmm. Okay. See what you can start with just a simple reply on Twitter. Next up, as we have a love letter to OpenBSD on Reddit. Oh, wow. Should I read that one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We were young, you at version 2.8 and I, a high school freshman. I played with DOS, Windows, and BOS before, but you were different. You were my first real love, the first one I really took the time to understand. You were so accommodating, always a man page away from resolving any misunderstanding. I didn't know how good I had it, really. I discovered Linux and took off chasing the next big thing. Always hopping from distro to distro, spending all my time fighting with her myriad interfaces, unable to truly commune. Maybe you just spoiled me, but I feel like I've been chasing an illusory image, a promise that never comes true. Then I saw you on a client's web server and all the memories came flooding back. It all made sense and you just felt like home. I wrote you to a USB stick, brought you home, and although we've both changed, we settled in like we never broke up. I love you, OpenBSD, and I hope we never lose each other again. Wow, is that not a nice way of telling you that this is a cool operating system?
Slightly creeped out, actually.
Well, it's just the way I presented it, but yeah.
Yep. And there's a whole Reddit thread about that if you want to keep going.
Yeah, people have been replying, and yeah. Have you ever seen a love letter to Windows like that? Probably not. So yeah, let's leave it at that.
Circling back to something only marginally more sane, Michael Lucas. He's got some of his recent talks have been posted. So he's got video from his recent Michigan user group visit is now online. He has a ZFS introduction as well as a brief talk about the EDY Mastery book. He says, I originally planned to talk about ED, but the ZFS talk went too long. That first speaker was a real blabbermouth. Instead, they asked me to talk about why the book was a secret, how I arranged sponsorship for that book, and how the various versions of that book came to be. He says, this talk is a little rough because I wasn't prepared to give it. I completely winged the whole thing. It's also the first talk where I dropped the F-bomb live and on camera because I have to rehearse my talks beforehand if I want to eliminate the cussing. So my talk for BSDCan 2017 is on the OpenBSD web stack, and that's now available for viewing on Amazon or YouTube as well. It appears just a couple of weeks ago, but Lucas hadn't seen it since then. So he's updated his personal YouTube playlist with all the places where you can watch him on video, including some older talks he found and some BSD Now interviews.
Oh yeah, that's the record. We should interview him in a future
I'm sure
Once
we will have to talk to him about Git sync murder when it comes out, and absolute FreeBSD when it comes out, and FreeBSD master jails. So he's going to have to hide from us.
Yep. We'll chase after him. Okay. We also have practical Unix manuals for you, MDoc. Of course, this is over at the MDoc homepage, I guess. manpages.bsd.lv. And this is basically telling you what MDoc is all about. And
so, it starts off with a utility without a manual is no utility, or is of no utility at all. So this is a guide to writing Unix manual pages in the MDoc language. If you're new to writing Unix manuals, or you want to learn about best practices for high quality manuals, this book may benefit your work. And it has examples and kind of walks through not just what the layout of a man page would be and the markup, but actually how to write a good man page.
Oh, wow, this is long. Oh, wow.
Right. And questions to ask yourself as you're working on it. Did I describe the calling syntax of the command? Did I describe what each of those flags and arguments means? Did I describe the command's operation and what it does? Did I describe what the exit status are and what they mean and when will I get these? And did I describe any files or environment variables that the program depends on so that you can change them?
Mm-hmm. Cool. This is pretty comprehensive. I think we should link from our FreeBSD documentation primer to that one.
For sure.
If we haven't done so already, I know a couple of mentees of mine who would be
it's
happy
a whole
to
book.
do that. Yeah. So as a reference for people who just want to know, how do I do this again? It's a good reference source. All right. So the MDoc people are certainly the ones who know about Unix man pages. We have more BSD meetups happening. So this has become regular things in certain cities. So the first that we have is the BSD meetup in Zurich. That's actually tomorrow from the day we're recording.
This is their third meetup, and they'll be meeting in Zurich on Thursday, May 24th. At 7 o'clock. The previous two were held at the Helveti Diner, so they're using that as a starting point. And ask any of your colleagues or friends that are interested to also come and join us. And then the same night, if you happen to be in Poland, the first meetup of the Polish BSD user group, sponsored by Real Systems and our friends over there, will be held again. That's Thursday, May 24th, which is tomorrow, and theirs starts at 6:30. They're currently scheduled presentations. First, Conrad is going to give an introduction to the FreeBSD project. Then Marius is going to talk about the checkpoints feature in ZFS. And then Rortek will talk about the Cubes OS and what that is.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. So let's hope there will be slides later.
At the Kopernik office buildings in Warsaw.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So let's hope we get slides later on or some kind of recap, and maybe this becoming a regular thing so that people in Poland or Warsaw can go to that one if they're interested in the BSDs. And last but not least, there isn't much yet, but at least we have the announcement for MeetBSD 2018, which is over at meetbsd.com. There's just, it's coming, it's out, and we'll keep you updated if there's more detailed information, but at least it's been announced, it will happen.
The tweet they had earlier actually had the...
had more infos, yeah. So the website isn't just up to the latest.
Get that for us quick here. MeetBSD will be in Santa Clara on October 19th and 20th.
So if you have a bit of holiday time left and don't know what to do, we might as well join us at the BSD conference called MeetBSD.
Yeah, so it'll be co-sponsored by Intel, who's donating the venue. We'll be at Intel's Santa Clara campus, 3600 Juliet Lane in Santa Clara, California.
Isn't that the headquarter?
I don't know.
Oh, wow. Okay. Anyway, Intel is
October
exciting.
19th and 20th in building SC12.
Okay, so I guess there will be more information about hotels and how to get there.
Yes, all that will be coming soon. But we now have the date so that you can make sure not to plan to go anywhere else.
Yeah, block that in your calendar.
If you're a developer, you probably want to keep the day before free as well, because I think that's when we might have a developer summit. I don't know if there's a developer summit yet, but
there are at least plans. Something. Yeah, there are people. I think they will try to organize something like that.
Yep.
So before we go into our feedback and questions section, we should mention our sponsor for that part, which is tarsnap.com, the online backups for the truly paranoid. Because you need to know that backups are important and you should make regular backups. But then you are like, well, where should I put all these files? Tarsnap is a solution for that because it encrypts locally your files you want to send up, and then the encrypted parts end up in the Amazon cloud, and no one else who does not have the key cannot decrypt it because, well, no key,
you
no
have
access.
The only copy of the key, so only you can make use of the backups that are in Amazon once you restore them. And that's what you want, because if the files are only encrypted once they get to the cloud or something, somebody could steal them or subpoena the backup provider and take the keys and all the kinds of nasty stuff. But if you encrypt it all on your machine before you send it, then that can't happen. And the other part is you need to be able to trust the application you're running, that it isn't also taking a copy of your key and sending it off to them or anything evil like that. But that's why with Tarsnap, the client source code is available for you to inspect and compile yourself.
Yeah, but just in case.
The best part about Tarsnap is it's all pay for exactly what you use. There are no fees and no minimum costs or fixed costs, anything. You just pay 25 cents a gigabyte for the storage and 25 cents a gigabyte for the bandwidth.
Yeah, and some of the code that was used to write Tarsnap is also available on the Tarsnap website. There's the script key derivation function, the Kivalu data store, and the spiped secure pipe daemon, which you can also use.
As it turns out, that all three of the major open source things that were put together to make Tarsnap are open sourced and available, right? So they have like those three you mentioned, but also lots of patches to libarchive for the tar support, and
yes, so
work that Colin has done on FreeBSD.
You can also look for bugs in the code, but it will probably not going to be something you will find because it has been scrutinized a couple of times, and there's also a bug bounty. If you do find something, you will get a bit of money depending on how big the issue is. But it's clean code. It's something you can trust.
They have a nice scale from $1 for cosmetic errors in the source code, like a typo, up to $2,000 if you find a bug that allows someone to intercept traffic or decrypt a Tarsnap user's data in a pre-release version. All the bug bounties are doubled if you catch them in a beta to try to incentivize people to look at the betas and try to find the bugs before they get released.
Yeah, so check out Tarsnap and start backing up. Our feedback and questions start this week with Seth with a first-time Poudriere builder question. That one goes, hi Alan and Benedict, I'm setting up my first Poudriere build system after hearing Alan talk about it multiple times. Do you guys have any recommendations for a newbie other than just have lots of virtual CPUs? Thanks and love the show.
Depending on your use case, not virtualizing it is probably faster than virtualizing it. And then it can also be very I/O dependent. So make sure you have fast disks or something so that it's not waiting all the time to read data from the disk or write data to the disk. But in general, it just works very nicely. If your computer's not as fast, it just takes longer, but it still works.
Yep. So start with
just rebuilt our custom package repo that is grown to about 900 packages now. So it takes a little longer than it used to when it was only 250 packages. well, we used to have 3 separate repos for different roles, but then we just rolled it all into one big one because it's easier to have everything in one repo.
Yeah. Start with an
really,
easy
it comes
port.
down to the thing I like best about FreeBSD is that I don't have to go and add a bunch of different repos to get stuff. Right? You get the mainline FreeBSD repo, and it's like, here's 30,000 binary packages. Just package install what you want. Not, oh, you need the non-free repo. You got to go do this, and you need the not LTS repo. You got to.
And then you have to catch the signing key first, and then make sure that it matches.
Or if it's even signed, and then it's like, just like, oh my god, how did
just
these
do
Linux
package
people even
install?
do this?
Yeah. So yeah, yeah, we both know how this feels. Start easy with simple port, and then once you get this running, and then move from there. Okay.
You just create a jail for the version of FreeBSD you want to compile the packages for, and you create a ports tree of which version of ports you want to compile, and then you just run the bulk command. It's pretty straightforward.
Yep. Look at the monitoring that it provides, and then you can see it happily chugs along. All right. That's the prettier question. The next one is from Farhan. Why we didn't go FreeBSD? Okay, that one goes, hi guys, I met you both at VBSDCon. Hope you're doing well. Thanks. We hope you do as well as we do. Hopefully we see you there next year again. I want to tell you of the tale of why my attempts to run FreeBSD in multiple environments were all dismissed. In short, major reason FreeBSD is underused is because it fails to provide a clean user experience that conceals the machinery and its awesome capabilities. I'm with a team that got access to a fairly large playground environment, a powerful Dell server with 1 terabyte of RAM, a few terabytes of disk, and more CPU cores than US states. That's cool. Certainly, that can do a lot of stuff. So the entire purpose of this device is to experiment with various virtual machines, learn new technologies, databases, general testing, etc. It's definitely overkill, and we have a lot of latitude on what we can do with it. So first things first, what hypervisor should we run on this device? I recommend that FreeBSD's Beehive paired with Veil, Bridges, and ePairs. We played around with it, and it did everything we needed, but it was ultimately rejected for ESXi. Why? Because ESXi interface was clean, intuitive, and easy to use, whereas Beehive et al. Required a lot of manual commands. We have varying levels of Unix experience, and some people are just not comfortable with multiple cryptic commands and prefer a simple web GUI. VMware has been,
Beehive would need another 10 years of work, and, you don't want to know how much money VMware has spent making ESXi the way it is. So it's not very fair to compare them.
Sure. And if you need a GUI tool, then I think there's nothing going around ESXi or some other GUI tools for that. But if you want the simplicity of the command line and fire up a couple of commands with just a few commands and don't click all the time, then Beehive is certainly an option. So second, we need an environment to run various pre-built Docker containers. Note, not zones, jails, or even C groups, Docker containers. Docker on FreeBSD is still experimental. Moreover, with someone looking over my shoulder, it failed to pull down a container, which did not make my case easier. So we went with CoreOS. Aren't there instructions on the FreeBSD wiki we haven't published?
I have no idea. I've never tried to do Docker.
It's going to become more interesting with the whole Kubernetes and stuff. I've seen some things at my department where someone demonstrated that to me, which looked interesting, but it's still in development and the APIs keep changing. And so we'll have to see how that works. That's that thing. We were working on setting up an application that would run on a public-facing host, so security was of the utmost importance, and we take defense in depth very seriously. But when we learned FreeBSD does not have ASLR, it was immediately dismissed. We'd have gone with OpenBSD, but LibreSSL is not FIPS 140-2 compliant, which would eventually become a requirement in production. I proposed hardened BSD, but it was seen as an obscure fork of FreeBSD whose future is unknown. I know that's inaccurate, but sometimes perception matters more than reality. So some of the decision processes here are a bit strange for me because the criteria should be put forth before you do the selection, not while you present something, then, oh, that's not meeting our requirements. So I think that's one of the things here. But okay, the only implementation...
ASLR is not that useful. I wouldn't be rejecting solutions just because of it. But anyway.
It's not the only feature in security land, and it's not... It's helpful, but it's not the killer feature which prevents every security thing from happening. Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely not... yeah, it's the way it is, at the moment at least. The only implementation FreeBSD saw was as pfSense. Besides that, everything else was CentOS, Ubuntu, or Windows Server. So I love FreeBSD, but there is an overemphasis on chasing novel features and seemingly zero effort on user experience. Well, and also stability and, cleanness of the code.
Well, it comes down to comparing it to CentOS, which is basically Red Hat. So all of this money gets poured into a user experience, although I don't think CentOS ships with any web GUIs by default. So the argument's a little weird there. But same with Ubuntu. Canonical's pouring all this money into it, but nobody's doing that for FreeBSD. So but yes, FreeBSD has an emphasis on things people want to work on. That's the nature of open source.
Yeah. But yeah, it goes on. A simple web interface goes a long way. FreeBSD had jailed since at least 2000, but failed to produce a clean interface, such as Docker.
I wouldn't call Docker a clean interface, but I understand the point you are making.
Yeah, I would have answered the same. But yeah, the multitude of hacked shell scripts, jail front ends are great, but not sufficient when you need an infrastructure of redundant containers. And while there may be solutions out there, it is one solution among many other standards. Isn't that the same in Linux land? So, okay. This allowed for Linux to come out with C groups and Docker and conquer the market. Well, that they already had because of just market share. Okay. This, while FreeBSD's Docker implementation using gel is not production ready. The one place we did implement it, pfSense, was because it was easy to use and powerful. Personally speaking, even I prefer VirtualBox over Beehive or QEMU because I like the interface. FreeBSD has massive untapped potential and frequently has years of lead time, but fails to create clean user experiences. I have a lot of other thoughts on things we're not chasing that could increase our market share and bring in new developers. But that should be enough for now. Just a bit of constructive criticisms. Follow-up. Silly as this may sound, I initially went with FreeBSD over OpenBSD because I preferred its console font, the box prompt versus the line. Is there a way to change OpenBSD's default terminal font?
No idea.
You have to ask the OpenBSD people. I think there are ways. I've seen different terminal...
I know there's a way to change the font on FreeBSD now. I don't know what it is, but I know there is a way.
Yeah.
So, while I agree with all of this, mostly there would need to be a company that wanted to take FreeBSD and build the, container front end onto it. It's not something that is going to really come out of open source, I don't think.
Yeah, and there are other ways or other areas where FreeBSD shines, and that is probably not mentioned often enough, or is not in the limelight that often. So it's not the only criteria for companies. I mean, this may be a bit specific, but yeah.
Let's go on to the next question.
Moving on. Architect writes us about encryption feedback. Ooh, wow. That goes, hey guys, while listening to the last episode, which was recorded on July 4th, I was curious about...
That's April 4th.
Oh, sorry. Oh, how could I
Not
get
recorded
July?
In the future.
I'm ahead of myself.
Stop giving away the time travel secrets. How do you think FreeBSD is so many years ahead of everybody all the time?
Technology from the future. I was curious about some of the reasoning behind the hashing algorithms recommended. I know that this may not necessarily be in your wheelhouse, so wild speculation is fine if need be. Do you know if there's a technical reason to use SHA-2 over Whirlpool for message digests? Is this a more...
it's the cryptographic right answers blog post. Remember that one?
Yeah.
Mostly because SHA-2's had a lot more cryptanalysis done against it than Whirlpool. Whirlpool is kind of off in the weeds.
Okay. Well, I guess security people can...
It's just more that I would say SHA-2's been tested more. So they have more confidence
around. Is it more secure somehow, or is it just more popular due to being the standardized function set? Well, you don't standardize something that you don't think it's good.
It's not that it's popular, it's that it's been tested more, is why they would recommend it.
Yep. In other realms, I've been working on setting up a mail server on HardenBSD using OpenSMTBD and Dovecot. I think I've got the software configured properly, but I'm wary to actually enable them yet because I'm not sure what certs and DNS records I should set or get set up for a secure mail system. This is purely for personal use, so stability isn't a huge issue, nor is data loss while experimenting with configuration. Well, you're saying that now, but once you have it running, you like it so much, you move more important data to it. But yeah, are you aware of any guides that cover the entire process of establishing a personal mail server? Didn't we cover a couple of mail server setups in recent episodes?
Yeah, we definitely covered those before, but in general, if you install OpenSMTBD and Dovecot, and then use Let's Encrypt to generate the cert, that's pretty much everything. Other than, I guess, DNS, you have to set MX records that say mail for this domain should go to this server.
Yeah, so I've been using several different sources so far, including Wikipedia, but the lack of any comprehensive guide makes it sound mostly like black magic. Step 1, install the server. Step 2, do everything else. Any help or guidance would be greatly appreciated, since having my own mail server like that would greatly reduce my reliance on proprietary services. Thanks in advance.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you make there. I've seen lots of mail server tutorials that involve setting up the mail server, and I don't think most of them bother telling you how to create the MX record to actually cause the mail for your domain to go to the server. It's just kind of assumed that you can handle that part.
Yeah. Well, you would need a guide that basically starts, what kind of hardware do you need? And then move from there.
For a mail server nowadays, you don't. The 512 megabyte RAM VM is fine.
Which would just do the trick.
It's not like the old days where a mail server was actually like one of the biggest machines on your network because they had to read and write all these files constantly.
Yeah. But since like going through the install and configuration and then so the whole thing until you really flip the switch and say, let's send mail through this and make it a production system. Okay, if people know about certain guides that they have found on the internet, then send it to us and we'll put it in one of the next shows. And last but not least is Dave with a handy tip on setting up automated core dump handling for FreeBSD. Oh, this seems like the core dump episode here. There's a lot of content about dumping core. So too long didn't read. This is a reference to using FreeBSD text dumps. And you basically add this to ddb.conf, which is the script log info equals show logs, show all logs, and show logged v nodes. Okay, log v nodes. Okay.
And then basically, when the script or when your system panics, it will enable text dumps, enable capture, grab all the lock information, show all the per CPU information and the current backtrace, all running processes, etc., and then do the dump and reset the system. Then in your sysctl.conf, you set up the text dump and alt break to debugger, and it will do your thing. And your next kernel core dump will be digitally auto converted for you to text and dropped into var crash as usual, and then it'll reboot.
Okay,
well, not quite. It will write it to swap, and then on boot it'll read it and write it because you can't actually write to var crash during your system is panicking mode.
For reasons, because the I/O system might also be affected.
Yes, it's entirely likely that is what's panicked, and so you definitely don't want to be using it to do your writing.
Yeah. So this is short enough to implement, and thanks for that tip. And that pretty much ends our episode for this week. Again, if you find something on the internet that's interesting in the BSD related sense, send it to us, as well as questions, comments, anything, stories that you found, and we'll cover it on a future episode if you send that to feedback@bsdnow.tv.
Yes. Also, write into feedback@bsdnow.tv and tell us how you are going to celebrate FreeBSD Day on June 19th.
Yes, that's coming up. That's the official FreeBSD Day. And if that is something you want to celebrate...
how are you going to celebrate that?
Yeah, let us know. Maybe some kind of, I don't know, surprise us.